Welcome to this short video tutorial. This is the paper 1 education with methods in context. This is for students that are doing the AS, not the full A level. This is the AS paper 1. Okay, now as you can see in front of you, you can see the front page. Now I'm using last summer's paper that my AS cohort sat last year amongst others. And as you can see is the front page, so you can just familiarise yourself with it. You put your details in the top, your centre number will be provided for you. That'll be your college or your sixth form college number. You'll have your own unique candidate number, and obviously you know your details. Also, it gives you a little bit of instructions on the front page as well. It tells you when the exam is. It will also tell you the time that you've got available, and that's an hour and a half. And I recommend that you work out how many marks this paper is out of, and then roughly work out how long you're going to spend on each question. Okay, depending on whether you get extra time. It does tell you some instructions as well, so if I just zoom in for that you can see. You do need to use black ink. This is the paper that you will submit your answers on, so you answer in the paper booklet. You answer all the questions on this paper. You answer all the questions in the space provided, do all your notes in that and cross through anything you don't want marked. And it also tells you how many marks the questions are available. The maximum mark for this paper is 60 and you've got 90 minutes to do it, so that's roughly a minute and a half per mark. And questions carrying 10 marks or more should be answered in continuous prose, and I will talk to you about them as I go through. Okay, so as you turn over, your first question. Now your first question is always a defined question. It's the same on the other paper, and they want you to give you a definition. Now what I would recommend is that you write in full sentences and you make sure that you define rather than just reword the question. Okay, so instead of saying, oh, this is education that is compensatory, make sure that you give a detailed definition of what this one might be. If you are ever unsure, you might want to give an example. You will get 1 mark for an example, but sometimes what I find is that students, they start with an example and then end up defining whatever the question is while they're doing it. Okay. Now the second one, again, same on the other paper. It asks you to give you 1 example, explain, and basically it's one of these application type questions. So I would start off by stating what the example is. So in this case, an example of a marketisation policy. And then you have to say, how does that affect a social class difference? So for example, something like league tables is part of a marketisation policy, and then you might say middle class pupils, their parents know how to use league tables, so they're more likely to send their children to a better school, and that means that they are more likely to achieve higher in school than a working class pupil. So you've given the example, you've explained it, and you've said how is it led to a class difference. It's not talking necessarily about failure, it can be about achievements as well. Question 3 is always an outline 3 things. Okay, so what I would recommend that you do, again, you answer in full sentences. I would start each of the 3 points on a new line. Okay, and again, make sure that your policy that you are stating explains how it has led to girls' achievement in the last 40 years. So just make sure that you link both parts of the question to be awarded the full marks available. Okay, and they give you lots of space. Then we've got the 10 mark question. Okay, so it's following that same theme again about application. This time it wants you to outline and explain 2 things. Now, if you remember on the front page, it said any question from 10 marks and above, they expect you to be writing this in continuous prose. So that means full sentences, full paragraphs. Now for this one, it is sufficient just to write 2 clear paragraphs. You don't need an intro and you don't need a conclusion. Just get started on the first way in this case. And start off by explaining what the function of education might be, whether it's from functionalist, Marxist, feminist, and then state how does that impact students' achievements. So you've got to be very clear that if you're given a Marxist function, for example, that you are stating this is reproducing working class underachievement and this is causing the working class students to fail. Likewise, if you are talking about a feminist function, so the function of school is to reproduce patriarchy, then sort of start to indicate why there might be gender differences in educational achievement and how it might cause girls to be high achievers, boys low achievers, etc. But just make sure that you are explaining both and you are linking both parts of the question together. Now, for these first 4 questions, okay, I'm just going to go back. It's worth 2, 2, 6 and 8, 10. So that comes up to 20 marks. I would expect the first 30 minutes to be spent on those 4 questions. Then we have got the first of the 20 mark questions. There are 2 of these in this paper. So this will take the next 30 minutes. And this is your extended piece on one of the topics in education. So in this case, it's asking you about class differences. Okay, so it'll always have an item, and the question will always start applying material from item A and your knowledge. So that means you've got to use the item. I would suggest that you say according to the item and state something and then explain what that is and how might it impact class differences. So does it imply that working class students fail or achieve? So you're expected to use the item and you're also expected to use your knowledge. So that means you've got to give a little bit more explanations than what is given with the item. And you've got to evaluate. So that means that you've got to be quite critical. So that might mean that you criticise any points that you make, or you might even compare it with in-school factors as well. Okay, now it's asking you that social class differences are mainly caused by differences in the home background. So I expect to see a good range of knowledge about cultural deprivation, material deprivation, cultural capital, and how that links to working class failure and middle class achievement. But as you can see with the item, it does hint at you to talk about factors within school as well, and it's saying that they're interlinked. So I would expect for higher evaluation that you show how home background will influence, say, how teachers label their pupils. It's often by appearance, the way they speak, the way they dress and what resources that they have. So that's linking the home background to teacher labelling, for example. Okay, and I would expect to see some of the in-school factors as well. In a question like this, I would expect to see answers that are talking about why working class are failing, but also why middle class are achieving. And you could also then start to say very, very briefly that gender and ethnicity might impact as well. And again, you spend 30 minutes on that one. You've got loads of pages to use and any additional pages at the end. And then the last question that you'll be asked on this paper is the methods in context question. And this is where you are expected to apply your knowledge of research methods to a given context in education. Okay, so as you can see, you get an item for this one also. It's worth 20 marks. So I'd expect to see you using 30 minutes to answer this question. It asks you to apply material from the item, so do the same again, according to the item, X, Y, and Z, and your knowledge of research methods. Okay, so they're expecting you to know practical, ethical, theoretical issues, in this case of using group interviews, and then apply it to the research context of underachieving boys. Okay, now what I would expect students to be doing on this question is, like I said, practical, ethical, theoretical strengths and weaknesses of group interviews. I would expect them to also start to talk about the school context, that you need to get past the gatekeeper to do your interview within a school. The gatekeeper is the head teacher. The head teacher might refuse because schools don't want to highlight the fact that some students are failing. due to marketisation, that you would need a CRB check if you are interviewing or doing group interviews for students which are under the age of 16. If you're asking about educational underachievement, which could be talking about home background, lack of resources, things like that, this context is quite a sensitive topic. So you could get a little bit of context for that. I would expect you also to be saying that often students that are underachieving, they might be speaking in a restricted code, and you as a researcher, most likely to be middle class, are speaking an elaborate code. So again, that rapport might be hard to get. With group interviews especially, you've got that influence of peer pressure. So if you're starting to get into that context, I would expect you to be talking about largish subcultures, the way that boys talk to each other, especially if they want to try and to achieve, okay, and what type of students are going to be dominating that discussion, and start to think about drawing out the context of underachievement of boys. And think about, imagine you're the researcher and you're physically going into a school. Will anti-school boys want to take part in research in this context? Possibly not. Anti-school boys most likely to truant. So if they're going to bunk off school, they're not going to want to take part in a focus group, okay, which incidentally might be happening at lunchtime. It might be happening after school. Okay, so you're only going to be getting pro-school kids participating in research like this. So I expect you to be drawing out some of these context links when you're answering that type of question. Okay, and again, you've got lots of pages to use to fill to answer your question. Okay, so just to summarise, that is the overview of the exam paper. Okay, so you've got some short questions, a 2, a 2, a 6, a 10. That's 30 minutes. Then you've got a 20 marker, which is the next 30 minutes, and then the 20 marker methods in context, which is the last 30 minutes, and that takes you to an hour and a half. Okay, hopefully this will just help you visualize what you are going to be expected to do in the exam. And just keep watching, because I will be putting some more videos up going through different questions and what have yous. Okay, so thank you for listening, and I hope this helps.